There is an urgent need to act, to foster harmony and tear down the structures that are built on one dominating the other. These structures were built by humans, and we have the power to change them. This belief is what Right Livelihood Laureates work towards every day, showing that it is possible to build a different human story, community by community.
Welcome to the interview series How to Mobilise Change. My name is Parisa Amiri, and during 4 30-minute interviews, we will take a deep dive into the engaging stories of this year's Right Livelihood Laureates. And now, please help me to welcome a crucial advocate for the right to safe abortions. Welcome, Dr. Eunice Brookman-Amissah. So you're now being celebrated for liberalizing access to abortions. Why is access to safe abortion such an important topic in Ghana and the region you have been active in?
But we're talking here about actual terminations of pregnancies. And abortion is every woman's need. It's been there since mankind, or maybe I should say since womankind. The first recorded evidence of abortion was in an Egyptian papyrus in the 1500 BC. So it's always been there. It's a great woman's need. But this need of women has suddenly, had become a controversial issue, and it is criminalized in a lot of countries. I think most countries had it criminalized for many, many years. But most recently, the criminalization has remained in Africa and many countries to the south. And criminalization of abortion means that women can't get access to a safe abortion. And when they don't, then they end up with injuries or with death. And this is what we want to change, that no woman needs to die from an unsafe abortion, because we have the technologies and the knowledge and the drugs to terminate a pregnancy. I was socialized to believe that abortion was wrong, as most people in a lot of countries. And through medical school, this was emphasized again. Women who had had abortions and who had come to hospital to be completed were considered as criminals, because abortion was criminalized. And I must say that they were not treated very well. So I became a doctor, and a young lady that I had looked after since she was 10 years old came to me, to my clinic when she was 14, and said she had come for an abortion. And I was like, we don't do that here. Then I thought, maybe I could help her. So I asked her to ask her mother to see me. And she left. And that was the last time I saw her. Over the weekend, she had been taken to a quack, and she ended up dying from an unsafe abortion. And that was when I asked myself, what was my role in the death of this young lady? I decided then to find out what the law, if any, in Ghana said about abortion. And nobody was willing to let me see a copy of the abortion law. But I was so determined, and I did find one in the Ministry of Health, and I smuggled a copy out and realized that she could have been saved because she was underage, so it was statutory rape that made her pregnant, and she was entitled to a safe abortion. I could have sent her somewhere to have an abortion. So at the next meeting of the Ghana Medical Association, of which I was vice president, I decided to make a presentation on the abortion law in Ghana and what we could do as doctors to change the paradigm from abortion and death to women having safe services. I think soon after, I was recognized by an organization called IPAS, that I'd never heard anything about, and started working, sort of as a representative for IPAS in Ghana. And I tried to get the Ministry of Health of Ghana to do something about abortion, and they were not very happy to do so. I used to sit outside the Ministry of Health trying to even introduce IPAS instruments for safe abortion, and nobody was interested. And then one day, it was announced that I'd been appointed Minister for Health. I hear there was a bit of commotion. The abortion lady is now our minister. As I said, I found out that the abortion law did allow for safe abortion in certain instances, so it was up to me to get people to disseminate the law as widely as possible.
So
The
it's a
world.
quite substantial change. You yourself held anti-abortion views, but you
Absolutely,
changed
yes.
your attitudes. I mean, that has to happen on a global level. But why do you think you were open to thinking in another way about that?
Because I saw the sense in making, changing laws and providing safe services. I mean, no, you don't want people to die. And if there's a cause that makes people die and you can change that from that paradigm to saving lives, then I thought it was worth working on it.
And in your advocacy, what were some of the biggest challenges you faced?
Ooh, there were a lot of challenges. At the time, abortion was not something that was talked about in Africa, in any civilized gathering. And so it wasn't easy to break the ice. I requested and made my way into meetings and conferences and talked about abortion. And most of the time it was like, ooh, what's this about? But I persisted. And then I realized also that most of the antipathy towards abortion, was because of ignorance about the issue, ignorance about women's needs, and I thought that if we could change that round to let people know why people need abortions, how they can have safe abortions, then how we can stop the deaths from unsafe abortions, then that would be a good place to be.
And how did this develop over time? Did it become easier, more difficult?
A lot of people didn't even know what the laws were. They didn't know about the heavy toll on lives that abortion was, exacting. So the advocacy was to let people know about these issues. And I could give you a quote about one elderly gentleman who had been Attorney General in Kenya. And we adopted him as a champion, as we did several champions to, people with a constituency who were respected in the community, in the countries that they lived in, and we worked with them. And at one of the advocacy workshops to sensitize these champions, he said he wanted to make a statement at the end of it. And he said, I was Attorney General in this country for almost 2 decades, in the 70s and the 80s. If I had known then what I know now about this issue, I would probably have changed things. From now on, it's reparations for me.
But do you consider yourself an activist, a human rights defender, or just an engaged citizen?
I consider myself an advocate. I think it's a bit different from the, from the other, other paradigms. I think I'm more of an advocate at high political level, and for an issue like abortion, I think we needed to go that far because it needed to have laws changed. We needed to have ministries of health to then translate the changed laws into services for women. So you needed to really go to that level. So advocacy at high political level, advocacy with ministers of health, ministers of women's affairs, with parliamentarians, both at the regional, sub-regional, and country level. And also with women's rights activists and advocates, with women lawyers especially, but also some men lawyers. I think we need men to talk on behalf of women all the time.
I think we do. I
Yeah,
think so too.
absolutely.
Yes.
I think it helps to have men do that. With religious organizations, and
But
then
also
even
with power concentration. There's
absolutely,
probably a.
absolutely.
And how has that been for you, trying to get men involved in your cause?
You know, once they get to know the issue, and especially the tragic consequences of unsafe abortion, and then you don't just present the issue, but you tell them the alternatives, what can be done to turn things around, clear cut, you know, changes, then they adopt and they accept that and they adopt it, and they go on to become advocates in their own, you know, spheres. So there was a lot of advocacy, and with judges, and especially with parliamentarians. But because because abortion was criminalized, change from the criminalized thing to something that was not criminalized or less criminalized had to be done sometimes through parliament. So working with parliamentarians was a big part of the
But
work.
working in that way, from elite central level, as they call top to bottom, how long did it take for those changes to affect communities, local communities and citizens?
Well, nothing comes easy, and especially with something that was so stigmatized and with a lot of taboo and so on. That I felt was the only way to go. If it came from the top, and we had women's rights groups, the women's movement. I'll tell you about the women's movement in a while. But when they finally got on board, they then went on to work, you know, with people at the community level. And in one country, my country, Ghana, we have a group of queen mothers, as we call them, who have associations. And they are very influential in their communities. So getting the queen mothers on board, you know, sensitizing them about the issue and telling them that things didn't have to be like that. And they all knew people in their communities who had died from unsafe abortions, women with children, women without children, and even young people. So we got them on board, and then they were able to support the communities that they lived in.
And what are some of the greatest or most prevalent misconceptions surrounding your work and your cause?
Well, people were socialized, again, like I was, to think that abortion was wrong. And it had religious and cultural and other fanatical, you know, background. So we had to tease those things out. And having come from where I did, it was easy for me to understand, you know, people's perspective about it. I was able to empathize with them and to, you know, we had something that we developed, something that we called values clarification and attitude transformation, where trained people were made, you know, were able to lead people through their own beliefs to see the issue of unsafe abortion as an issue that affected other people and how they should react to it. After a while, I realized that it was more the ignorance about unsafe abortion that made people and, you know, to be antagonistic to it, or to not want to talk about abortion. There were several times when, after a workshop, a sensitization workshop, people didn't want to sit with me at the same table, that kind of thing. But over time, the same people took up the course.
You were alienated because of your views.
Absolutely, absolutely. At one time, I sat at a table for 10 all by myself, and but then I went back again, and after the third time, they actually invited me to say, well, okay, now come and give us a whole presentation about this thing that you've been talking about.
So it sounds like there has been many points where you could have given up.
I think I'm an optimist by by nature, so there was never any time when I thought it wouldn't happen. I knew it would happen, but I knew it would take time. And I always prayed that the donors who supported our work would have the patience to wait till things change. I think most often donors want their return on investment, as soon as possible. And advocacy for safe abortion does take time.
So besides conviction that you obviously have and optimism, what have been some other key support factors that made you persist, keep going?
I think the fact that we had been, my team and I had been able to convince some people to turn over from their initial stand to support safe abortion was a great encouragement, and therefore I knew that it could be done. We even worked with I invited the Secretary General of the Supreme Council of Muslims, SUPKEM, in Kenya, to a sensitization workshop. And I thought he was going to sit back and say, what's this about? But then he got up and said that Islam was not against abortion, the Quran was not against abortion, and that was a great moment for us. So he became part of our team to go around and do sensitization workshops. And people like that were hardcore anti-abortionists, after a sensitization workshop would suddenly see, I call it the scale fell off their eyes, and they saw that it made sense to provide access to safe abortions.
That is incredible. I think an applause for Dr. Eunice. So, besides obviously the facts, the information, I think a key fact here is how you actually convey information. That there's something about how you package this information, this message, that make them open.
I found very early on that people wanted the evidence. So obviously, research was necessary, and every country wanted their own evidence. But of course, we couldn't do research in 54 African countries. Research is very costly. But we did some key ones that we used as part of our advocacy drive. Evidence is that so many women are dying that they didn't know about. And that unsafe abortion was happening. And sometimes, we actually had women who would come and testify to what happened to them. And so it was there. We had the statistics from the hospitals, not very much. We found that from the records, abortion was not even well captured. So we had to do our own magnitude studies and then other studies. And a very, very powerful tool was also studies on cost of managing or treating unsafe abortion. That it was 10 times or more costly to treat unsafe abortion than to offer safe abortion. And that was also a very powerful.
The money usually helps, pointing out economic relations. So providing evidence, taking obscure issues, and defeating ignorance at large. Incredible. But how did it feel then to receive the Right Livelihood Award?
I didn't believe it had finally happened. And I must tell you, when when I received when the call came from Switzerland, I thought it was a hoax, a scam. So I turned it off. I mean, I turned off the phone.
Oh, you turn off the phone.
And then this person was very persistent, and he called again.
Like you, persistent. Yeah.
And I thought, well, maybe just somebody that I know that is in Geneva. So I said hello, and there it was. So I was happy, not for myself so much as for the cause. I thought that if an organization or institution or foundation like Right Livelihood would recognize work in this area that is so stigmatized, still to some extent still, and such a taboo area, and bring it out into the open on the World Forum like this, then that's a great win-win for the cause.
Well, abortion is still obviously a taboo subject in many parts of the world. And starting out and now, how do you talk about abortion at, say, a political forum versus with communities or civilians in the Ghanaian context?
We framed abortion or death from unsafe abortion within maternal mortality. So sometimes that is a starting point. Maternal mortality in Africa is so high. And when we started work on this issue, 30% of maternal mortality, whole 30% of maternal mortality was from unsafe abortion. It's now down to about 17%, which is still too high for an issue that doesn't need to cause deaths of women. So there's still a lot of work to do. But there's been a drastic drop in the numbers of deaths from unsafe abortion, mainly because of access to safe abortions in some countries, but also access to better treatment and management of unsafe abortion cases. And the biggest thing was the dawn of medication abortion, tablets that could be used to terminate a pregnancy. And that was like putting the power in the hands of women themselves. Terminations of pregnancy didn't have to be done by doctors. And that mid-level providers like midwives and nurses could be trained to provide services. That was another big win.
And maybe also a part of why it maybe feels so dramatic that it has to be some kind of procedure.
Absolutely. I mean, termination of pregnancy is one of the easiest medical procedures, and yet they made it look like it was something that doesn't have to be done by the professor of medicine. Mid-level providers can do that and do it quite well. So, and there are many more nurses and midwives than doctors in all our countries. And then also midwives and nurses are where women are. If there's no doctor, there's bound to be a midwife or a nurse. So, training them to, developing the policy to allow them to provide services, and then training them to provide services has also been another big win.
Has there been a shift in opinion regarding abortion, women's rights, reproductive health in sub-Saharan Africa?
I would say to a great extent, yes. And I think it's because the initial opposition to abortion was born out of ignorance and misconceptions and religious fanaticism to some extent also.
Usually women that seek out that kind of help are stigmatized, isolated. Do you see that being less prevalent?
It's much less prevalent. It's much less prevalent and everybody is talking about abortion now, and especially access to safe abortion. And several countries have gone on to change their laws to make abortion available to women, and that was something that we celebrated when it happened. Not as many countries that I would have hoped at this time, but like I said earlier, it takes time.
But there is a current global backlash to women's reproductive rights. We speak about this before. It was Argentina, Poland, the USA. What is your view on this development going on?
I think it's very sad, but women's issues have always been like that. I mean, it took forever for the world to accept even contraceptives. It took forever for the world to think that women should be educated to university level. So it's part of the gender thing. I see no reason why politicians in the country that is considered the country that has the best human rights approach should go back on something that has been a woman's right in that country for over 50 years.
You spoke about how defeating ignorance was so important and crucial for you. They can't even blame on ignorance because,
No.
as you say, they are considered humanitarian, they're considered educated. So it's based in morality. How do you defeat that?
Whose morality are we talking about?
These,
Their morality or the morality of the people who think that women should be made to live, to be allowed to live their lives the way they want to live it. So it's their morality against other people's morality and against the morality of the women who need abortions. And I don't think that we should be going along with their morality.
But these conservative powers are
They are very
prevalent
powerful.
in these countries, and they have actually overturned Roe v. Wade in the US.
I know it was a sad day for the world when that happened. But I think that women's rights will persevere. I think I can see it
But
coming.
we need advocates. Yes.
Absolutely, women's advocates. There was a time I didn't think that any countries in South America were going to change their laws because of the Catholic, hold on those countries, and very conservative. But then it started happening, and it's one after the other. It was Mexico, and then it was Chile, and then a few more that were very hardcore anti-abortion. So I think it will happen.
You're optimist even about this repressive wave.
And even in the U.S.,
Yeah.
where the rescinding of the Roe versus Wade, there are countries, red states, which are kicking against it, and they are making their own local.
Putting up a fight.
Absolutely, and I think right wins in the end always.